So we will begin with our psalm, Psalm 99. Psalm 99. Last week we left the psalms with the people dancing around the calves and Moses trying to talk God back into sort of saying, don't deny your people. But here's some psalms this psalm I just want us to sort of listen to. It's an enthronement psalm of the king, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, just a little bit. The Lord is king, so let the peoples tremble. He sits enthroned upon the cherubim. Let the earth quake. The Lord is great in Zion. He is exalted over all peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he. Mighty King, lover of justice, you have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Extol the Lord our God, worship at his footstool, for holy is he. Moses and Aaron were among his priests. Samuel was also among those who called on his name. They cried to the Lord, and he answered them. He spoke to them in a pillar of cloud. They kept his decrees and the statutes that he gave them. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, but an avenger of their wrongdoings. Extol the Lord our God and worship at his holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. This is Psalm 99. It's an announcement that in this enthronement psalm, this is the last of the enthronement psalms. The enthronement psalms are Psalm number 93 and Psalms number 95 through 99, which celebrates the Lord's enthronement, acknowledgement of the nations and his gracious communications and his decrees to Israel. This announcement that the Lord as king rules with justice. And king, I want us to get an idea of this whole idea of why we hear the word king so much and why we hear God's bodily description, seeing God's face, writing with God's finger. When people aren't even supposed to mention the name of God at this point in time. This is another idealized humanization of God, the king, the likes of which should be emulated, if not mirrored, in human kings chosen by God. So you put all of these attributes into this phraseology of God being a king, so that when there are kings, that the kings actually are supposed to emulate that and emulate sort of that behavior and that grace and that protective fierceness of God for the people themselves. But we'll talk some more about this way of putting God in human form that is just contextual for people to be able to wrap their hands around it. Something which they cannot even truly name. This lover of justice. This lover of justice is the matter of divine justice. It's an emphasis on divine justice. And I like to say divine justice as opposed to how we translate justice to be righteous, but on God's divine justice, pure equity, in the execution of justice. God sits enthroned upon the cherubim. We remember the altar that we talked about, those two those two animals that sort of have these wings that go across the golden seat of God, and God is seated on that particular throne, and that his footstool at the bottom of that's where we worship God, because that's where we call God holy. Very rarely will you see Moses, Aaron, and Samuel all mentioned among God's priests. Usually it's Moses and Aaron or Samuel and so on and so forth. But here we're saying, and they're putting them together in this context for no particular reason, but it's just unusual. I just wanted to note that it's unusual that here we are, that Moses, Aaron, and Samuel, these three great priests, Moses and Aaron, Moses who brought the people out of Israel, Aaron, who ended up being the priestly progenitor, the one from whose family line came all of those who were the priests of the temple, and then Samuel Samuel, who was actually one of those who helped choose the kings in the very beginning. He spoke to them in a pillar of cloud. We know that the pillar of cloud went before the people of Israel as they moved forward in the wilderness, and they kept his decrees and statutes. We know what those are. Those are the commandments or the laws or the sayings that God gave to Moses to give to the people. But I also don't deny that God had to forgive them and avenge their wrongdoings. There were some things that these stiff-necked people did that God had to avenge, but God is also forgiving. And so now, finally, in this last phrase, this last time when we hear the words, extol the Lord our God again in this psalm, it is a joyful, powerful praise to invite everyone to worship at God's holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. Once again, the holiness of God. So that's just a quick run through of some thoughts. There wasn't much commentary on this particular psalm, so I added some things in as well from my study of it. Any thoughts or ideas on this?
Could you talk a little bit more about the pillar of cloud
Yes.
and where that was in the Bible? I'm not remembering.
Okay,
that.
what you'll remember is that by the daytime in the wilderness with Moses and the people after they left Egypt, there was a pillar of cloud that guided them in the wilderness. And at nighttime, there was a pillar of fire. Okay. Especially at the very beginning of their trek out of Egypt. At the very when Pharaoh was there, they were guided by this pillar of fire and guided by this cloud, and that's how people knew it was God's presentation and God's manifestation that I am with you. And it also sort of acted as their buffer and protector from the people of Egypt, and it guided them through all throughout. So whenever there's this manifestation of God's presence in this pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud.
And do you know what scriptures that would be in?
We read it a few weeks ago in Exodus.
Okay.
I can't remember which one off the top of my head. Anybody else think of something now?
I'll find it.
Yeah, it will be right after the Passover scripture from a few weeks ago when they left Egypt. It'll be right there that this pillar sort of guided them out.
And sorry, I'm trying to talk and I'm not unmuted.
No, okay. Oh, okay.
Think Exodus 13.
Okay, thank you.
13. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud and guided them away by night in a pillar of fire. 13:21.
Okay.
There you go. That's why I asked that question of anyone. Usually, Reverend Pond sort of gets that on the tip of her fingertips or her tongue.
Well, we were just in Exodus, and we were doing the Pentateuch for our Bible study. So that's why my brain gets jogged.
Very good.
And then Moses reminds them of that in Deuteronomy, the second giving. Yes. Before he departs, he reminds them of all these things, like in the first 4 chapters of Deuteronomy.
That's right.
I'll check them out. Thank you, Robin.
You're welcome.
You know, I noticed that verse 4 kind of is a standout verse. I mean, it's a standout verse. Because we talk about holy, 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 holy. Hope you're doing that hymn on Sunday, by the way. Holy is he, holy is he. Everything is about being holy. Lord is great. Give praise, blah, blah, blah. Then, lover of justice, you've established equity. You've executed justice and righteousness in Jacob, which is not as much about holiness as some other sentiment that he's trying to express, but it's kind of stuck in the middle there, which is it almost is the emphasis of the whole thing with holy surrounding it. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I got.
And it is the gift, the lover of justice and establishing equity. It is the gift of God for God's people who come from Jacob. Jacob is Israel. So it's the righteousness in Israel comes from this divine justice and equity that God holds sacred. So it's almost like we claim you holy, 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 and then we name the gift that you've given our very nation.
Exactly.
I think I'm going to use the first 5 verses as my call to worship this Sunday.
There you go.
If not the first 3, either the first 3 or the first 5, kind of sitting with me as a call to worship, especially in such a time as this. As he is exalted over all the peoples.
Right.
Yeah, holy is
Lover of justice, right?
Right.
And that's the thing I love about this psalm when I think about establishing equity and executing justice. It lays it down as a foundation from which we often stray,
right? But
to which we can always return when we extol God and worship at God's footstool.
Yep.
If we get our priorities straight, as they say. Woo. Preaching, y'all. Y'all preaching that hope.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, and let the earth quake. Of course, the manifestation of God is very often accompanied by the earth trembling. If you remember, the mountain trembles, Mount Sinai trembles when Moses is up there, and the people say, "Oh, don't let God speak to us. Let Moses come and speak to us. He's scary." But the earth shakes and fire is around and there's brightness. All of these things are evidence of manifestation of God being there with God's people. So that's that. In our first reading, we're going to continue, if we remember that chapter 32 through 34, verse 3 or something like that, is the addressing of the covenant violation and restoration. So here we go with Moses being in this intimate place with God once again, in this great conversation. There's a saying that Moses is with God face to face, and this is just an expression of intimacy available only to Moses. Very often in our text, we hear that God says, God says, you will not be able to look upon my glory. So how is it that he can look on him face to face? This is an expression of intimacy with people. It's not so much the physicality of the face to face, it's the notion of that very intimate notion of being face to face. Moses said to the Lord, they're having this conversation. You have said to me, bring up this people. But you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now, if I have found favor in your sight, show me your ways, so that I may know you and find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people. And he said, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And he said to him, if your presence will not go, do not carry us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people, unless you go with us? In this way, we shall be distinct, I and your people, from every people on the face of the earth. And the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing that you have asked, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. Moses said, show me your glory, I pray. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you the name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no one shall see me and live. And the Lord continued, see, there is a place by me, and you shall stand on the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen.
Beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes. Yes, indeed. What a conversation.
Isn't it? Oh!
You know.
Yes.
It's part of that same conversation where Moses is talking God into sparing God's people.
Yes.
Mhm.
And this joyous conversation, this beautiful conversation. Yeah. So let's go a little bit here. Your people, using the language that is covenant terminology. Moses reminds God of this relationship in contrast to other places. You know, consider this, that this nation is your people. You chose us, we are yours. My presence will go with you can be better understood as, oh, and I love this. I personally will go with you, and I will give you rest. We're focusing on this idea of intimacy between God and Moses. It's a powerful, powerful intimacy. I personally will go with you, and I will give you rest. What a promise that is. God knows Moses' name, and Moses will know God's. Once again, an expression of reciprocal intimacy. You can call me the Lord. You can't call me God, but you can call me the Lord. So I know you. You know me. Show me your glory, I pray. God's royal splendor or appearance, rather than this previously talked about, priestly idea of a fire and a cloud. So rather than a cloud, show me your glory. Show me all of your splendor, God. I've seen the burning bush. I've seen the pillar of fire. I've seen the pillar of smoke, the cloud of smoke. I've seen all of that, but show me your glory. I will make my goodness pass before you. And I will do this. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. You cannot see my face. I love that. I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Back, like the words arm, hand, and face. This reference of God in anthropomorphic terms, bodily human terms, we do this as humans to contextualize and create a comfortable way of imagining the unimaginable. We do this to contextualize and create a comfortable way of imagining the unimaginable. Many of you know that at Union Theological Seminary and in many seminaries around the country, there is a disdain, not a disdain, but they want to have people be politically correct, as I will say, in terms of naming God Father or so on and so forth. And why can't we name God Mother and so on and so forth? I remember hearing this conversation in seminary and then coming back to do a Bible study here at St. James, and I asked some of the women, I said, you've heard me refer to God at times as women and at times as mother and at times as father. How does that make you feel? And they were like, finally, I feel like I'm included. And I realized that no one at seminary had ever asked anybody what they thought. They just wanted to make this political statement. But I thought when I went back to class and how I teach it that it is not just being politically correct, It is even not even thinking about the gender of God. It is about the expansive language for God. God holds so many names. There are so many names for God in the Bible that when we can be expansive and creative, then we can really think about all that God contains. God needs to be father for people. God needs to be mother for some people. God needs to be, the Lord is my shepherd. That's an expansive nature of who God is. Jehovah Nissi, my provider.
There are so many different characteristics that our vocabulary can't
Accommodate.
adequately describe him.
Him.
Describe him.
And that's why I know, right?
But you know, one thing that stares up at me at in this passage is the fact that he keeps telling Moses that he can't look upon him. He can't, that he wouldn't survive it. And that's why Jesus is so important, because we got to look upon God.
Woo, you better go ahead.
That's right. Yeah. I wonder why, just came to mind, God sent his son, but he never sent a daughter or his wife or anything. It's so interesting that the male physical image was what represents God in the son. But God, the Father, Mother, Spirit, is amorphous almost, male, female, because it's a spirit. That's the only thing that gives me comfort in being able to define anything. Like Lisa, you said, our little piddly language has no clue. We don't even fathom language that would explain who God is.
We can't even adequately interpret or translate between different languages,
Exactly.
because there's gaps. There's just gaps in our understanding of intention and meaning, So how can we ever adequately describe God the Spirit?
Right. And I was thinking, what must her hand look like? I'm going to put my hand. Whoa, that must be like a serious hand as well. And then I'll take my hand, capital HAND, away, and you'll see my back. If we put it in human physical terms, what must that hand look like?
Think about sometimes when you're translating just as humans from one language to another, some words do not translate.
Right.
There's no word for that, let's say in Russian, or no word for that in, Japanese.
Right. Asian
but
language.
It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist for the people who use that word.
Exactly.
Right. Very much true, especially in relationship to the Hebrew, which, we all know just the word love has so many different forms in Hebrew. Whereas in our English language, we just say love, but what does it really mean to love? From language to language, culture to culture, space to space. So, again, when we're talking about God, no wonder we can always go back to two things. In the Old Testament, I am that I am. So whatever it is you need, I am that. And then whatever you want it to be or could be, God is. So I am and God is what God is, and what God will always be and has been, because that's the I am of it. And then we have, he's our provider, he's our protector, he's our mother, he's our father, he's our lawyer, he's right. Then the other attributes, he's righteous, he's loving, he's caring, and then the leading and the guiding, And it's an infinitive list that we could never really finish what God is. So God just is. And then we say, when God is that, he says, yes, I am.
And then we ask, but what does God then require of us?
Oh, that takes us back to Micah.
Right.
Well, when God says, I am that I am, it reminds me of our parents, when we would say, but, why do I have, because I said so.
Told you
That's why.
And
Ask me again.
I am who I said I am,
and then you hear it again.
right.
And don't forget, Lisa, they also said, do you want me to show you the back of my hand?
There goes that hand again.
Very well. Straight from the Bible.
That's right.
But I also want to introduce to you the idea of the symbolism of these words as well. What does the hand symbolize? What does the face symbolize? What does the back symbolize? In a lot of this language, the right hand of God is the powerful hand of God, and the left hand of God sort of is the hand that cares and provides. But this is the right hand of God is power and might. That's what the inference is of the right hand. When you hear that phrase in Psalm, the right hand of God, even in our New Testament text, there's a power in this idea that this hand is a protecting hand that guides you and that holds you. I will put you in the cleft of the rock and I will protect you. And I will hold you in my presence until I pass by. And when I take it away, you will see me leading you. You will see my back. I'm not turning my back on you. I'm leading you into where my plans are for you. Woo!
Oh.
So the imagery of this anthropomorphic imagery that we see here that gives us a contextualization also has a deeper meaning for what the symbolic representation of a hand is, the symbolic representation of a face is. When you see a face, you get stuck on those features. You can't see that. I don't want you trying to describe what I look like to anybody, because I need people to experience me. I am being. I am that I am. Ashe, eye, ashe. I am being, and I need people to encounter me. Do not lock me into this face, into this body, into something that someone will one day say, this is what I heard God look like. Let me make an image.
Even we have so much written about Jesus and what he did, who he was, but we have very sketchy details in what he looked like. It was like even the prophecy said he's got nothing that anybody should look upon him for. He's just not that attractive. That was the implication. But it's sort of like, how do you describe God in the flesh? How do you do that? And yet Jesus's hand was always prominently described. He reached out and touched someone and they were healed. He wrote in the dirt. What he was writing, I wish I knew. But like you always hear about his hand, like he didn't wash his hands. The disciples didn't wash their hands. I presume he didn't wash his either in that ritual manner, before eating. They're always talking about his hands. And then, of course, his hands were pierced with the nails.
It is the doing, Lisa. It is the action, the actions by which we are to know God. the actions about how God works in our lives and how God is with us in our lives and in our community, how God calls us to be. It is the action and the attempt of Rome to stop that action of Jesus' hand by putting a nail through it. The ultimate victory was that that hand was not immobilized. The hand of God cannot be immobilized. The hand of God is always going to act and is always going to be.
It's like when John the Baptist asked, are you the one?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus sent back the word. He said, tell him what you have seen.
Yeah, tell him what you see. Don't tell him what I look like.
Right, tell him what you see.
Mm-hmm.
It's a part of your hope message, Pastor Derek. The
Oh,
hand.
yes. And then the hand,
Yeah.
When it was, as we were saying, all said and done, Jesus said to the Father, into your hand, I commend my spirit.
Yeah.
Not my body.
Not my body, not my face. Okay. Into your hands, I make the choice. Commit because I'm spirit.
And Jesus told his disciples that nobody could snatch them from his hand.
So the symbolism of this is being rooted for us here. The power of the hand, the power of the back, the power of, and when we in humans, like when God, I like the idea that when God says, you shall see my back, that God is going before us. But we humans, when we turn our back on someone, it's an insult. So the juxtaposition of that and those phrases and the way that we can really open up the power of God's being and presence by understanding that we need to use these anthropomorphic terms of human body, but the meaning is much deeper than just our hands and feet. That was deep, y'all. That's poetic.
Yes, it was.
I have one more observance from
Sure,
the
go
passage,
for it.
and that is that God says, "Call me the Lord."
Mm-hmm.
And all we've just been hearing, I am, and he says, we know each other now. Proclaim before you the name the Lord, which I think is different. It's a different relationship that he now has allowed Moses to call him the Lord and not I am, or whatever the word was for, or not word, for God's name. I think it introduces a new
relationship. I think it establishes the relationship.
Yeah, I agree.
And once again, this is the reciprocal intimacy. Yeah. I know your name, Moses, and I will proclaim to you mine. It's beautiful. That's where that song comes in. He knows my name. Very powerful.
Yes.
But something about when somebody knows your name. And those of you who have been teachers, especially in this era, when you know there have been some funky spellings of names.
Oh yes.
And when young people get like insulted when you don't pronounce their names correctly, even though it doesn't read anyway like it sounds on the paper. But I will share that ruling elder Andrea Bradford and I often, we've spoke about this, and I often do this with my Uber drivers and my cab drivers. I often say, what is your name? It's written on my phone, of course, but I say, can you pronounce it for me? Can you tell me what it means? There are certain people, and when you see the letter M on someone's identification, it's usually for Muhammad. And many of the people say, I don't want my name out there because I can be persecuted for my name, but my name is Muhammad. And others will say, oh, I'm so glad you asked, because this is my real name. This is my full name. This is how you can say my name. And I tell them, I said, well, I had a friend of mine that worked in human resources, and there was an Asian woman that came into an office. And I can't remember her Americanized name, Andrea, but I always say, and they called her like Betty or something. And the human resources person said, no, what is your name? And we are going to have people learn how to say your name. So Andrea, that story has gone around thousands of times in New York City from your role as a human resources officer at the Ms. Foundation, because I thought it was such an important thing.
It's a respect too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Acknowledgement.
And
There's
so
a-
many cultures here now, you know,
Yeah.
and people coming to us, to the United States, with names that we aren't familiar with or aren't used to. And so we want to Americanize them for our own comfort. And basically my philosophy was, no, we need to come into your world because your name came from your world. And if we're going to be together, we need to respect one another, and we'll start with your name.
But it's the embodiment of who you are.
Exactly.
There's a story, I don't know if it's a true story, but it sounds like a true story, where a Nigerian family had a young girl going to school, like junior high school, and she had a very Nigerian name that people found difficult to pronounce. And she asked her mother if she could, modify her name to make it more pronounceable. And her mother looked at her and said, if they could pronounce Tchaikovsky, they could pronounce your name.
Right?
And I was like, that's the truth, you
That's
know?
right. So true.
That's right.
And I often also very like the latest person I wrote it with in an Uber, his name was what is it? Thierny. And I said, so what does your name mean? He said, it means learned. Do you know what that means? So my name means learned. And the pride by which very often other cultures decide that you are named with a specific meaning. And when you can live, I think I've told you that when I did the juvenile boot camp aftercare services with some of these kids who were juvenile delinquents, as stated by the county, I did that exercise with them. I got their definition of all of their names. And I said, what would it be like if you lived up to this name? Just imagine your life and what that might be like if we were to, Thierno was his name, if we were to live up to our names. My name means king. Derek means king, and it also means the man who beheaded people in the 16th century so that when he stood up like this, he made an A-frame, and that's why the oil derrick is named the oil derrick. I know the meaning of my name. So that gets us into this whole thing about naming again. So yeah. So
Yeah, I know mine too.
yeah. Genevieve.
You know, when you go to Ghana, they
Mm-hmm.
have a naming ceremony.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So God does not turn God's back on us. God leads us. It says, my glory shall go before you, and you can follow in the brightness of my glory, in the shadow of my glory. Because I will make all my goodness pass before you. Woo! All right now. Thanks be to God for that. I'm just so inspired by that. We are now moving out of Philippians into Thessalonians, Paul's letters to the people of Thessalonica. We do know that Paul is the primary writer of this, while Silvanus and Timothy likely had a hand in the composition of this letter, reflected by the many uses of the term we. That's linguistics are how the Pauline letters and the epistles are sort of separated out as to Paul has these distinctive ways that he writes and grammatical ways in which he writes. And when you look at them in the Greek, you can see the grammatic differences in some of the other phrases and some of the other ways that things are expressed. That's how they assign and sort of delineate the letters that actually Paul wrote and Paul didn't write, and the ones that were written in his name. And here it's an amalgamation. The two people that followed him and that worked with him very close as Timothy and Silvanus, they had a hand in this because of some of the language shifts that are in here. And mostly the main thing is that they use the term we. If you think about Paul, if I have not love, I am a noisy symbol. But there's a lot of the we language in here that is a multiple plural we. I, Paul, oh, sorry, not I, that's number one. Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy, to the church of the Thessalonians, and God the Father, the Lord Jesus Christ. Grace to you and peace. We always give thanks to God for all of you and mention you in our prayers, constantly remembering before our God and Father your work of faith and labor of love and steadfastness of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. For we know, brothers and sisters, beloved by God, that he has chosen you because our message of the gospel came to you not in word only, but also in power and in the Holy Spirit and with full conviction, just as you know what kind of persons we proved to be among you for your sake. And you became imitators of us and of the Lord. For in spite of persecution, you received the word with joy, inspired by the Holy Spirit, so that you became an example to all the believers in Macedonia and Achaia. For the word of the Lord sounded forth from you not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but in every place your faith in God has become known, so that we have no need to talk about it. For the people of those regions report about us what kind of welcome we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve a living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who rescues us from the wrath that is coming. Paul sure knows how to lay on the flattery. These are the typical Greek and Roman openings of a letters. The way that you do this, opening and greeting and thanksgiving for Thessalonians in response to the gospel that they've received and that they emit out into the world. Now, while most Greek letters begin with the word greeting or chare, here the writers use the similar sounding Greek word for grace, charis, while also inviting the typical Jewish greeting of peace, shalom, in order to remind the people of what God has provided to them. So all of these people, these Gentiles, they are schooled in these languages. They're schooled in Greek. They're told to leave their languages behind, and you have to learn Greek and you have to speak Greek. That is a major tool of the emperor of colonizing. A major tool of domination is to take away someone's language. Think about that, taking away someone's language. What is it that many people that we hear in some of those clips on YouTube and TikTok, they say, you need to learn how to speak English. It's a power move to take away your language, to take away the language of the people that you have conquered. So in this, Paul knows that people also will know that in Rome that they're using Latin. So the Greek chare, which is, they use this word for greeting, I greet you, I greet you, I greet you. Paul changes it to this whole word in Greek for grace. and shalom, grace to you and peace. So he twists this familiar greeting and brings it into the gospel of Jesus Christ and brings it into the whole lineage of the people of Israel and Judaism and Jesus and so on and so forth. So there's that.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul would be writing to the new congregations, I'm going to call it a congregation now, the new people in Greek, and the scriptures they will have would be the Hebrew scriptures, right?
Actually,
they don't have the gospel.
Actually, everything was written in Greek, and even the Jewish people, they were given their own texts again in Greek, because the emperor decided that he sent 70 writers, and that's why they use what is called the Septuagint. 70 writers to rewrite everything from Hebrew to Greek. And that was the only book that they were allowed, the only writings that they were allowed to use.
So that's what the people, the new groups, the converts were using.
Yes.
The Hebrew, the Septuagint, whatever.
Septuagint, yes.
Yeah.
Septuagint from for 70.
Did they edit it at all, or just they actually just rewrote it?
That's a good question. There's some evidence, especially in the way that the word is re-spoken by Paul and by some of these early disciples, that most likely there was some different editing, and because there were 70 different people and they all didn't agree. That's the only problem with that. Is like when you have 70 people trying to translate something, no one's going to have the same message.
That's
But
dangerous.
yeah.
But they were translating the Hebrew scriptures
into Greek. And the priests in the temple still had the Hebrew.
Oh, yes.
So it was still around. It's just this strange notion of making people lose their language.
Because sometimes in translations, I mean, you're influencing.
You're interpreting.
Based on your interpretation of something.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking.
Yeah, most definitely. Even this term Silvanus is a Latin form of the Greek name Silas. So it's Paul and Silas. So we know that name, right? Paul and Silas.
Yes.
Silas is the Latin form of Silvanus. So he's using his Latin name when he's talking to Gentiles.
How about that?
I mean, his Greek name, the Latin form of the Greek name when he's talking to these Gentiles, and they are his co-workers and emissaries. This triad, faith, labor of love, and steadfastness of hope, words that underline the recipient's status as laborers. They have work of faith, labor, and steadfastness. So when the people that Paul is talking to, these Thessalonians, he is saying that these underline all of why you are so wonderful. You have faith, you do the labor of love, and you have a steadfastness of hope in our Lord. So all these things are what typifies your particular community. For in spite of the persecution, here it may not indicate the persecution or the persistent maltreatment and harassment by others, but only that the believers' refusal to participate in regular religious rituals is causing them social and occupational discrimination. So I've mentioned this before about the guilds. The guilds were almost like what we would call the unions now. There was a carpenter's guild, there was a stonecutters guild, and very often in these spaces, and mirroring these spaces, just like the house church mirrored that, in these other spaces where the Gentiles were, they would gather in these guilds, or in facsimiles of these guilds, and they would talk about the gospel of Jesus Christ. But every guild often had a toast to Caesar. This is one of the rituals. And in your toast to Caesar, you lift up a glass of wine and you claim Caesar as divine. Christ's followers would not do that, for they would do communion. They would do as God had told them to do, and remembering them. And they would not swear to Caesar. They would not owe allegiance to Caesar, and they would not toast to Caesar. So you could lose your job for that. You lose jobs for that. You could be teased, or you could just be discriminated against, or have social isolation, because no one wanted to be around anyone that wasn't respecting Caesar in that way. It was very dangerous. So in spite of that persecution, you still received the word with joy and were inspired by the Holy Spirit. As a matter of fact, the first century writing that we have from Pliny the Younger to the emperor is him asking for the formation of a fire league so that people can put out fires in the town. And the emperor denies him the ability to give these people the right to form a fire company, because he said so many of these places are hideouts for Christ followers. And Pliny's test for Christian that he shares with the emperor, which the emperor gives him praise for, is to say, what I do, because there were lots of people saying, that person's a Christian, that person's a Christian, and they were just trying to get people in trouble. He said, what I do to them is I say, raise a toast to Caesar. And if they raise a toast to Caesar, then I know that they're not Christian. If they don't, then I know they are, and they're persecuted. So that,
Yeah.
that's your test.
How devious.
Yeah, right? So Macedonia and Achaia, these two Roman provinces in Greece. These, just so that we have a bit of the territory in which we find ourselves. These are Roman provinces in the country of Greece. Macedonia, there you go, Linda.
Yep. Yeah.
And we had what kind of welcome we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols. So this gives us the assumption that the addressees are Gentiles rather than Jews or even Jewish sympathizers, neither of which would be described as worshiping idols, unless in a guild or a household, etc. The plural suggests that they changed their allegiance collectively as a group. I also want to just throw out there in some further study in the communities here, that there were Jewish folk who tried to fit in with everyone and were swayed by being in this community of Gentiles to go back to who they were supposed to be, and to also turn to God from idols. So that's not just as simply as they were only Gentiles that they were talking to. Everybody was mixed in. Everybody was thrown together, but collectively as a group, they decided that this is what they would do. And this term, the mention of wrath, indicates that Paul's initial preaching, the first time he was in Thessalonica, warned of a day of judgment. When I say his first appearances in the community of Thessalonica, every letter that Paul writes, except for the book of Romans, except for the letter to the Romans, is him addressing a community that is already founded. So he goes to a place, he starts something, he goes off to start something else, he hears something about them, and he writes them a letter. So this is what this kind of a letter is. They know that he's already spoken to them about the coming judgment and the day of judgment. That's what this word of wrath means in this particular phrase. Your thoughts and ideas on this particular text? It's just a nice little, you're some good people to start. Start. All righty. All right, let's get to our gospel. So last week we finished up with a couple of parables where Jesus has these three parables that he gives to these Pharisees, Sadducees, and all these other people. And they finally say, wait a minute, he's talking about us. So then they try to find a way to ensnare Jesus in response to these preceding parables, in which they recognize are being criticized and condemned. And they proceed to ask Jesus three trick questions in Matthew 22, verses 15 through 46. We're not going to get to all of those, but that's what this whole pericope is about, trying to trap Jesus and trap him in his own words. I'm going to read this to you, then give you another note about words. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to Caesar, to the emperor, the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. Okay, here's some notes. It is not the actions of Jesus, if you notice, that those in authority try to trap him with. It's not the healings, it's not the turning of water into wine, it's words. Words convict in our scriptures. Not only is your word your bond, your words are, even more importantly, your witness and your testimony. And these concepts are more than just words. They are a moral way of being in the world. So when you speak, it's not that just that your word is bond. People come to know who you are morally and ethically by your words. So if we can entrap you by your words, then we can actually attack your ethics and your morality and your ability to say that you are standing in the Word of God. So this is the type of trick that they're trying to trap Jesus in, because with that, they have the authority to condemn him. And only through that condemnation can they bring him to Rome. So there's this power in these words here. Herodians are possibly aristocratic supporters of Herod Antipas's family. There's a political reason for this. Herod is the client king for Rome. He's put in place to seem as if Jews were in charge of Judea when it was really Pilate and the emperor. Pilate was the governor for the emperor of Judea. Herod was not liked by the Jewish people. And all of the iterations, the 5 generations of the 5 different family layers of Herods that were in charge, from the one that when Jesus was born to the one that's in there now, these Herods claimed to be Jewish, and yet they went on a major building campaign that took away their cities and built things for Rome and sort of lived the life of luxury as client kings, doing whatever Rome told them to do. So this is another group of people that they brought along. Taxes. The taxes are on agricultural yield and personal property, amounting to about a denarius a year. And we know that a denarius is a day's wage. So hear this political argument as well. The sacrifice to the temple for the harvest of, say, maybe Pentecost, is diminished when you, as a tribute to God, when you have to, when you're dealing with this whole thing with these taxes. And this is, you need this money in order to, well, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but you need that money in order to do the sacrifices and do what is called for you to do when you go to the temple. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? He calls them hypocrites to their face, an outright accusation because of how he was just talking to them in the 3 parables. He's already called them out. They brought him a denarius, a day's wage. Whose head is this and whose title? There's a whole study of Roman coins. I forget the name of it, but it's a major way of Roman occupation in places is to not only change the language, but to change the money. And everywhere you go, you see the Latin inscription. A typical silver denarius of Tiberius's day would have had his portrait on the obverse and this Latin inscription, Tiberius Caesar Augustus, son of the divine Augustus, on the back. So hear this. When Jesus is holding up this coin, when they're holding up this coin, the money that is used in the temple is shekels, because denarius are not able to be used for the sacrifices to God in the temple. That is not the approved money. It is the shekel. So that's why you have money changers in the temple. They're changing the denarius into shekels. So this is all a part of this whole economic imbalance that Jesus gets upset about when he turns the table, because this economic exchange in part undergirds Jesus turning over the tables, because taxes are one thing. The ability for God's people to sacrifice for cleansing, sin atonement, and worship is another. And that system was jeopardized. That's why Jesus turned over those tables. The people weren't even able to go to God and say, I have sinned, where's my forgiveness? They weren't able to do their penance. They weren't able to build their relationship with God because the money changers were being unfair because of this denarius. So you see whose head is on this. You see whose title is on this. Give that to who you're supposed to give to. You know what you're supposed to give to God is shekels. Why are you having semantics over the kind of coin that you're pointing out to me and paying taxes for an empire when you won't even do your tribute to God in the temple? Or you haven't allowed the people, because you've allowed these rude money changers in there to be able to go and do their due diligence for God. So when they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. Whose head is this and whose title? Once again, I'll just reiterate to you. Imagine, this is such a colonizing tool, and it's a tool of war, and it's a tool of just taking over people and bringing people into different situations. You change the money and you change the language. You make people lose a sense of what their sense of culture is and what their sense of identity is. The whole misnomer that Manhattan was bought for shells and wampum and all that other stuff, it diminishes the exchange, the cultural exchange of the indigenous folks here, and says, oh, it's just clams and shells. That's only clams and shells because it's only being looked at from the colonizer's perspective. And it was also not a buying of the land because they didn't own the land. It was an exchange of gifts to be able to be a part of this community. And by taking away and denigrating what that is, you took this major sense of who people are. You changed people's names. That's what the whole thing in Roots was when they named him Toby, and they beat him to take his name away. When you take away language name, money, and identity. That's how you start to colonize a people and take them over.
When you quoted what Jesus said about, whose title is on here and whose face, in other words, give it to him, that's kind of like the expression, give the devil his due.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's good.
That's good. That's it. And why are you
Basically, the taxes
Mm-hmm.
had to be paid in the denarius, not the shekels, right?
Right.
So that's just, I mean, it sort of answers itself.
Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrite?
Yeah,
You know
because
the answer to this.
this can only be used for the taxes.
Yeah, give
And
the
so
devil his money. That's his money.
exactly. So, you know, and why do you think they were amazed at that? Because did you think they understood that he knows that it can only be used for one purpose?
They were expecting him to say, so that they could turn him over to Caesar, that we are unfairly persecuted and we should not be paying taxes to Caesar.
Mm.
Okay.
That's what they expected him to say.
Mm-hmm.
They were amazed he had more sense than them.
Mm-hmm.
They were being devious and they thought he was too stupid to know it.
And he brought God into it. Because he's saying to them, give unto God the things that are God's. And we also know from other instances in Jesus' ministry that he convicts them very clearly. The widow's mite spoken about. The widow's mite is not about this poor woman giving all that she has. The widow's mite is about the person who is holy making a big deal about giving such a big offering without following God's law to take care of the widows and the orphans.
Mm.
That's what Jesus is criticizing. He's not romanticizing poverty and that the poor always give the last that they have just because they're so faithful. He's criticizing the fact that we have a duty to take care of the widows and the orphans, and you're watching this woman give her last and you're making a big deal about the amount of money you're giving? So all of this gets connected in this political, economic, and this real way of Jesus criticizing what is happening in the temple. And we're starting to get to that in Matthew 22, because we know soon
I don't know that is really always kind of preached, because I heard many sermons that the focus was on the widow giving her last.
Right.
So I don't know that this is kind of sort of one of the first times I've heard it, expressed that way, that the focus was not really there. The focus was in
It really is.
totally different.
It really is, Linda. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
The way that our biblical scholarship and the way that we're still fighting the effects of colonizers using and enslavers using the biblical text for their advantage, and we're still shaking that off. Give everything that you can, give all that you have, even if it hurts. We get that a lot in our theology of giving, rather than the theology that says we are called to take care of one another.
Okay, I got that.
Yeah, and so I don't blame a lot of our churches about that. I do actually look at some of the hundreds of years old of biblical interpretation, and one of the reasons why I very rarely will study commentary from the late 1800s and the mid to late 1800s, early 1900s, is because there was a specific focus on the biblical interpretation to lift up Arianism.
Okay.
Before it became used by Hitler, there was a whole way, and it was German scholarship. Most of the biblical scholarship at that time period was from Germany, and the whole idea was to try and lift up Arianism, which then became used to say, well, the Aryan race is tantamount. So they figured out how to fuse that. So we're still unraveling that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it just makes you think that the time to go deeply into text and the importance of looking at more than one reference source before you deliver the word. I mean, I'm just reflecting on this, because I've heard it so many times in that space of the widow gave the little that she had and we should get, and I've never questioned that until you just expressed what you did. And so that just leads me to believe that there are a lot of people who have not heard that view at all. And I don't know, that's just my thought on that.
And it doesn't fit with capitalism. What fits with capitalism is that get as rich as you can because the poor are always going to be with you. That also is contested now academically in terms of what is actually happening in that text. The poor are always going to be with you, Judas, as long as you're stealing the money for the purse.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
The poor are always going to be with you if you're criticizing people and not doing anything to help people. Yeah, of course.
Right.
And yet it's been used in our society to say, well, that's capitalism. There are always going to be poor people. There are always going to be someone who's at the bottom of the totem pole. So why am I going to worry about them?
Well, yeah, you're right. It doesn't have to be, but it's easier to embrace it, especially if you're in the group that you're comfortable with things where they are.
And then it becomes the language of our nation, because that's the narrative of our nation, of our national thought process.
Speaking of that, somebody posted a meme the other day that I reposted, and it speaks to what we're discussing right now. And it says, imagine evangelicals thinking that bringing prayer into the school is a reflection of their faith in Jesus, but not free lunch.
That's a very good one.
Yeah.
Free lunch reflects him better.
Yes. And like for we Christians on this side of the spectrum, when we read these passages, we often misinterpret them because we don't know what the Torah says about these issues. So we see that passage as, oh, this poor woman showed her faith that she gave the last 2 coins that she had, and we don't
believe that all that many years.
But we don't know that the Torah told the Jews that they're supposed to take care of the widows and the orphans. She shouldn't have to give the last 2 coins that she had, or she should have had much more, that she could afford to give 10% of what she had.
But that's not the way it's being presented. And that's because, in my opinion, and it's just really a humble opinion, is because the study, the person, the deliverer may not know that information, or have maybe researched different different comments and its connection, And so then it multiplies with people who still believe it's real, it's literal message. Because I know I would say, I venture to say that a lot more people do believe that it was about the widow and she gave her last. Then,
Well, yeah, I agree with you, but I'm just saying that it's because we don't know what the Torah says. And we don't know, and we don't understand what Jesus was saying to the Pharisee.
Because if your leader, or if whoever is teaching is, or delivering, is not sharing that, or there isn't an opportunity to learn that, there's nothing that would even give you that clue.
Well, then there's that other layer of the established church looking to poor people to give up all that they had. Like we saw the Roman Catholic Church, with they just took the gold, the jewels, the resources, the labor, the sweat equity of the poorest of the poor from all over the globe, and they're still telling people in poor neighborhoods, like, don't forget your offerings, and and this and that and the other, and these people are like scrambling, trying to find something to eat.
Absolutely. And the question is, who's delivering the message? It's still back to the message.
And I'll also,
unless you just you take your you take that time and study and dig more deeply for yourself. And that, again, yeah.
And part of the idea around the study too, Linda, is we know how entrenched some of these interpretations are, and to know how long it takes for different understandings to seep in. I simply ask for people to hold both. Okay, so we know. Okay, so what does it mean if she does give all that she has? But what does it also mean if it's criticizing the rich person? And where's that discussion that we can have? And how is God calling us to be in the world when we look at our world in that context with both of these? Does it really seem like this widow who is here, who doesn't have anything to eat, should give her last, and we not have a coffee hour where she can take food home?
I think I don't question that. I think I'm trying to express that.
Yeah, I get it.
If the deliverer themselves are not, aware of those different views, it continues the very same literal meaning. It can't expand what it hasn't been presented to them. That's a better way to say it.
I love it.
Yeah. So,
it's also an easy way out. This is what I learned, so this is what I'm going to teach.
Exactly.
It must be right because somebody
exactly.
And I will be honest. And I will be honest with you. In teaching these texts and in teaching them in seminary form, there are folks who say, "Yeah, I get it, but that's not going to preach in my church."
Well, yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of that.
There's no time to discuss it, so you can go to church and you can hear that interpretation and go away with it.
Yes.
Yeah. And just go away with it.
Yes, which I have for all my, pretty much all my life until right now, and looked at it. I mean, I didn't go any deeper than that.
And it goes both ways because, I spoke of how Christians don't know what the Torah says. Jews, in this atmosphere we're in right now, I've heard this more than one time. Some Jews think that when a Christian says pray for the peace of Jerusalem, it means that we want Jesus to come back and take over everything. And so they reject when a Christian says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And I've been hearing that more and more and more lately. I find myself balancing on a balance beam because I have friends who are conservative Jews, borderline Orthodox. And, when I express heartbreak for the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, oh my God, it's as if I'm an anti-Semite now.
Yeah. Well, it goes there because of that trauma. Yeah. And I get it. I get it. When you talk about that, praying for people and praying for the peace of Jerusalem, I was very surprised by a post that Amakai did, because I wasn't quite sure where it was coming from until I looked it up. But he was saying that he condemned the spitting on Christians in Jerusalem. And so it's just one of those strange things that the things that are going on in the name of faith. And when we think about this commandment of love and these parameters that were set forth by God, with these things that were given to Moses, it's so interesting how our living out of those things for our own self-preservation goes against the very things themselves.
I just wanted to make a comment about something that was said a little bit earlier. When you made the comment about that won't preach in my church, or you've heard those comments.
Yeah.
And that really, to me, that illustrates the difference between pastors who teach and pastors who just preach. I've been in the presence of both. A teaching pastor, you're a teaching pastor, will explore things, explain things, and flesh things out. A lot of preaching pastors, it's more for what panders to their congregation. They're not trying to teach them.
Or denomination.
I've seen that.
They're not trying to teach them. They're trying to keep them in line or keep them enthralled, whatever. But if it means expanding their minds, and they think that means, oh, I'm not going back there, because he's not doing what I'm looking for. They're not teaching pastors.
They're entertainers.
Yes, that's exactly what they are. And they know that that's what they're playing to their crowd.
Right.
Uh-oh.
That gives more meaning.
Reverend Derek, please don't let Minister Nina watch this one, okay? Don't put this one on YouTube, okay?
Well, if she watches it, you just don't let her testify about it.
My whole line and yours will be blown up. I'm just saying, don't say that.
That gives more meaning to the title, Teaching Elders.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Linda, that's the title for pastors, for preachers, for ministers who are ordained in the Presbyterian Church. Is one of our titles is Teaching Elders.
Okay, I've never heard of that.
Which separates us from ruling elders, so who are the persons who are elected to lead the church as the body of governance. And we are in tandem, the teaching elders and the ruling elders. That's sort of what that is based on.
So is that similar to like where our deacons and then maybe our ministers? I don't know.
Sort of.
Our deacons, don't really teach.
Yeah.
Our deacons just govern this,
Yeah. That would be
our ministers are supposed to be, I don't know.
And what denomination are you, Linda?
A Baptist.
You're Baptist, right?
Yes, I am.
Your and your ministers.
Close to that. Yeah.
Our ministers are supposed to, and then our deacon, which I'm a deacon, but I don't what we do is just the governance of, the spiritual, in support of the ministers' programs and so forth. So, as opposed to our trustees, which I'm that also, but that's all just the finances of the church. So, yeah, so it's just different names. I've never heard of
it's just different names.
Yeah,
but does the
but
same
I can
thing.
see the duties kind of intersect to some of our duties. But
If you go to a Presbyterian church, you'll never really hear the congregation talking about teaching elders and ruling elders. They talk about elders, deacons, and ministers. That's basically,
But
Right.
I do hear and I do concur with that, description of a teacher as opposed to I'm giving a message. There's a little difference there, quite a difference. And so if you are there just for a great message and you want to just be uplifted, then you are fine. And you might walk away even fulfilled. But if you are looking for, deeper thinking, learning, you may come away with some disappointment.
And that will be covered in my homiletics class when I get my LLC and start teaching my institute.
Okay. And I'll attend.
Yeah, right. Because that's a lot to try to. I just started to say, well, I don't know what you think, Reverend Derek. That's a really big elephant.
Well, Reverend Derek has already gotten one inquiry about the school that I attend. I mean, he answered it very eloquently, and I will say that, and kind of, very tactfully said, she's in study. I mean, it's not, but, believe me, the inquiries are already out, and he's already been given one. And, wanting to know specifics about, because it is Baptist to Presbyterian, it could have been a little of that, but just questioning, he answered it appropriately, I felt.
Yeah, especially since I grew up Baptist, so.
Right.
And but let me say this, and Reverend Derek, I think you and I have discussed this, and maybe it's been said before. This is why when you push to the point in the Gospels where Jesus overturns the money tables.
Yeah.
This is why he was very, very upset. And he called them a den of thieves because the people didn't have the money that they needed to buy the doves and the other things for their sacrifice to go to the priest, because the money exchange between the denarii and the shekel, the interest was high.
Yep.
And so we wonder sometimes where we get interest from. It really goes all the way back. It's a biblical concept. In a nice way.
And could it also
like
be
people can't get what they need to get,
right,
as far as their spirituality and their salvation, and the temple priests in a nice way were turning their backs and sanctioning that practice.
And so, going back to the Torah, that was prohibited in the Torah.
Exactly.
In addition to what is being given to the priests, the denarii, that you have to still pay for the taxes too, and what's left to even offer,
and then you wonder, right, and then you wonder why they poor. You made them that way.
Exactly.
Well, but again, I don't know. My friends, we could go on and on and on, and we will next week. This has been so good. This has been so good. I am so happy and so full right now that I am grateful to you all for all that you have said and all that you have done, and for how your minds have just gone to these different places. And God is expanding our territory.
Yes,
amen. And the meaning of that territory is our spirit. So I'm reclaiming that phrase for our spirit and for our divine interaction with how God is working in our lives. So God, for this, we thank you. Yes. We thank you, oh God, for opening our mouths and opening our minds and helping us to look into the meaning of how this plays out in our context compared to how it played out in the context back then, and the in-between space, because in there you are still speaking. And we say, thanks be to God for your voice, for your love. Hold us and keep us. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Thank you.